Hey everyone, Steve the Amateur Historian, coming to you from the heart of Chinatown. And actually I'm heading westbound, getting a little bit more towards the western fringe of the Chinatown area, because I have another episode of Historic Murders from Portland, for you. I'm trying. You know, it's not too uncommon, especially in these olden days, for a husband to snap and kill his wife and maybe her lover when he discovers that she's taken another lover. Out of rage, jealousy, shame. It's kind of a commonly told story about the scorned husband who snaps, kills the wife and maybe the lover, or maybe just the lover, and what have you. But it's interesting when a case of pretty strong infidelity comes up and a murder takes place, but the overall motive is not the loss of your wife or getting your wife back, but it's something else. So as I approach my destination, let me lay the groundwork for you, because the genesis of all this begins nowhere near here. I'm on the edge of Chinatown here in Portland, but the story actually begins really in a place, and I'm gonna hope I'm saying it right because it's a compound word of Onalaska. It's a town called Onalaska, Washington. Probably a pretty small place, but there was a man who TriMet. Anyway, so there was a family that lived in Onalaska, Washington. The Gramatti or Gramatti? God, it's loud out here. I'm gonna say Gramatti family. I believe they were probably Italian. And there was George Gramatti, his wife, and I believe they had 4 children. And George Gramatti was pretty high up. He was like a railroad foreman there in town, and he was kind of one of the higher up guys, and he was in charge of hiring, firing, watching over other employees that got hired there. And he met and befriended a guy while there named Nick Doltes. I think it's Doltes. Doltes is how I'm gonna say his name. I guess I want to say he was, I forget his nationality. He might have been Polish. He spoke very little English, but essentially Gramatti hired Doltes and he started working for the railroad company, and he started becoming friends with the Gramatti family, and in particular became pretty well acquainted with George Gramatti's wife. And it's so interesting because it seems like George Gramatti didn't even care. He knew of the infidelity, made no effort to really quash it or to say like it's me or him. She continued to see him. He actually fired Doltes from his job and then hired him back a little later while he was still sleeping with his wife. And even when Doltes decided to leave and ultimately ended up here in Portland, he asked for George Gramatti's wife to go with him. And she did. But she made one mistake. She decided to bring one of her kids with her. their oldest son, who I believe was 8. That was her one big mistake. And that's a convenient stopping point, because when Nick Doltes and Miss Gramatti got to Portland, the place that they checked into was the Everett Hotel, which is this building right here. I'm at Broadway and Everett, which makes sense if this is the Everett Hotel. It's no longer the Everett Hotel. I'm guessing there's businesses down here. I'm guessing these are, yeah, it says micro lofts. So these are probably like studio apartments, pretty small, rustic, probably cost $2,500 a month to live in. But this is where Nick Doltes and Mrs. George Gramatti checked in at, under the name of, I want to say, Riggs. So they were using aliases. They were keeping real hush-hush. And they weren't here very long before George Gramatti showed up in town. He didn't show up in town to get his wife back. He showed up in town to get his son back. He was like, you want to leave with that asshole I had to fire, that guy that I'm letting you sleep around with, that's fine, but you are not taking my son with you. And he tracked him to the Everett Hotel. So it's around 1:30 a.m., August 27th, 1922. Doltes and Miss Gramatti, I never got her actual name. The newspapers are always like Mrs. such and such. So that's all, like, I just regard her as George Gramatti's wife. They were on the top floor. They were on the 3rd floor. I hope nobody who lives there is looking out the window and wondering what I'm doing. And apparently Nick Doltes looks out the window and he sees George Gramatti down on the street. He's tracked him down and he knows where they're at. So things are getting a little tense. George Gramatti barges in, demands to know where Doltes and his wife are. And even though he used an alias, Doltes, I mean, to get a room there, he comes in and asks where this guy and his wife are. I'm assuming using their real names, but the guy still tells him at the front desk, oh, they're up on the 3rd floor of the hotel. And so George starts barging upstairs. Again, I mean, the guy working the front desk probably thinks, oh my God, this guy's wife's cheating on him. This guy's going to go upstairs and make a bloodbath up there. So he calls the police as George Gramatti's going upstairs, and he just wants to get his kid back. He just wants to get his kid and get out of there. It's like if you've ever seen Arrested Development and Tom Jane, I just want my kids back. So he goes up there, knocks on the door, demands his kids. You know, it's a little uncertain what happens up there, but ultimately Nick Doltes ends up shooting George Gramatti. He just opened fire, boom, 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 5 shots in quick succession. I think only one of them hit George Gramatti, but it hit him in the head, dropped him down dead in the room up there. Miss George Gramatti, in the aftermath, says that her husband is the one that showed up with the gun, but then Nick Doltes himself, who it's totally beneficial for him to say, oh yeah, he showed up with the gun. He admits that it was his gun, but that George Gramatti came after him, there was a scuffle, and he had to shoot him to protect himself, self-defense. The classic, oh, I shot him out of self-defense, and yet I emptied my revolver on him. And so, as of today, and there's video surveillance here, but there's this really old staircase through this door here, which makes me think that's probably even, because that looks like a really old staircase, so I'm guessing even back in the 1920s, that was probably the main way you took to get upstairs. There's a few more entry doors down here, but I'm guessing this is probably the one you exited from, because these are like storefront doors. So, in the aftermath of the shooting, my projection is that Miss George Gramatti and Nick Doltes exited out this door right behind me, and apparently the moment they got outside, because again, the guy that's working the front desk calls the police the moment he sees George Gramatti going upstairs, so the police are already on their way as he's getting up to the 3rd floor, and when they walk out of the building, the police are already here. So they walk out, presumably this door, right into police custody. And that's how they were apprehended. So not exactly a thrilling conclusion to matters, but, I mean, what more do you need? You've got a shooter and scorned lover coming out here. And right up there, one of those rooms up there, there's a dead body. It's really tragic that when all is said and done, George Gramatti's wife is the one that comes away more or less unscathed. I mean, her husband's dead. Her child has got to be traumatized because he just witnessed his father getting shot. That has to be at least somewhat traumatizing for an 8-year-old boy. They never say in the newspapers, maybe nobody asked him exactly what his take on what happened upstairs was, because we're still left with these conflicting stories based on what the surviving adults had to say. But Miss George Gramatti, so her husband's dead, and her lover is on his way to prison for life. That was the ultimate decision. He was obviously charged with murder. The jury found him guilty but asked for leniency, meaning life sentence over the death penalty, and the jury, the court gave him that. So, as far as I know, Nick Doltes spent the rest of his life in prison. And I mean, just talk about two scumbag people. When they asked Nick Doltes, like, why did you do this? Why did you try to take this guy's wife away? And he was like, I liked her. He said, I like her, in broken English. Again, he didn't speak English that well. He was like, I liked her. I don't understand. I liked her, so I asked her to leave with me. There was just no kind of concern over the fact that he was, like, breaking up a family. But at the same time, Miss George Gramatti didn't really seem to care either. And here she is, the guy that she left with is going to prison, and her husband's dead. And even after all that, she did not seem to care one bit. Whenever authorities talked to her, newspaper people talked to her, she always had this very flippant, smiling, chuckling manner, and it was like no momentous event had happened. And it's so funny because she just up and left at the drop of a hat with this guy, took one of her kids but abandoned the other three. I don't know what her plans were for. She was maybe just going to abandon them, or hope that eventually down the line she could get the other three, or like, oh, I'll just take the oldest one and he'll just be my son and we'll live this out on the road. I don't know. And yeah, it was probably the most pathetic thing that I heard from Miss George Gramatti, other than the fact that she just didn't seem to care about anything that had happened, was she sat down and she was, because they were like, well, what are you going to do now? Your husband's dead, your lover's going to prison, you have children. And she was like, well, my husband, he had a good amount of money, he had a good job, he probably had some kind of retirement plan of some kind, and he owned land, so when I go back home, me and my kids will be well taken care of. And I'm like, you bitch! First you bail on 3 of your 4 children, and then you completely bail without a care in the world on your family, on your husband, who lets you do it. So you just completely just break your family apart for your own selfish motives, and then have pretty much no emotional response to the father of your children getting blown away in an old hotel room. So your attitude is, after bailing on your family, oh, well, I'll just go home and raise the kids and we'll have money, we'll be fine. Just completely disassociated from reality. So, I hope her kids had an okay life, but I hope the rest of her life was kind of crappy, because scum is the one word that continuously has come to mind when I think about this individual. She was just scum. And that's the story of the Everett Hotel murder, if you can call it that. Nick Doltes claims self-defense. George Gramatti's wife kind of implies the same, but they both have a reason to put the blame on the guy who's dead and can't defend himself. It seems like he came in and just wanted his son, so I don't understand why he would end up getting shot for that, when it seems like he was fighting for his son more than anything else. It seems like this was probably a murder done, or at least a manslaughter done out of nerves, because this guy was clearly scared when he saw George Gramatti down below the hotel staring up at him like, I found you. And that's it. This guy wasn't even a Portlander. These weren't even Portland people. These are people from Onalaska, Washington, wherever that is, who just ended up in Chinatown back in the 1920s. So anyway, that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it kept your interest. Maybe it piqued it. I don't know how you feel. And until next time, everybody, remember to like, share, subscribe. I appreciate it. Hit up my Patreon if you want to help me that way. A link is in the top of the description, as always. And until next time, thanks again, guys, for watching. And this has been Steve the Amateur Historian with another episode of Historic Murders of Portland.